Hey everyone, Den Haring here for Fish Den 365. Welcome back to my channel. You know, it's the dog days of summer, and oftentimes this time of year it becomes difficult to catch bass shallow. Some days you just have to go deep in order to get them. And so today our video is going to be 5 tips for catching more deep water bass in the summertime.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so 5 tips for catching deep water bass in the summer. Number 1 is to be as efficient as possible. One of the best examples I can think of that is recently I was fishing a small reservoir and there was another boat out there. It was a man and his wife and their son, and we were both fishing the same contour line. They were coming this way, I was going this way, and we were both concentrating on the 15-foot contour line because I guess both of us noticed there were fish there. I certainly did. The fish that I saw on the graph were on the bottom, and so that dictated my approach. We were both doing a very similar thing. They were throwing what looked like a soft plastic stick bait, like a Senko, but they were throwing it weightless. I think they were throwing it wacky rig, but they were throwing it weightless and just letting it go down into that 15 foot until it got down to where the fish were. And they were catching a few here and there. They were catching them that way. But what I was doing was throwing a drop shot rig with a wacky Senko on the drop shot. So I have a weight on the bottom, my wacky Senko's here, I pitch that out, it gets down to the bottom much faster. And as a result, I was catching about 4 to 1 between myself and them. I was just kind of watching them and monitoring how I was doing. And it was interesting because the woman in the boat was watching me too, and she says, you know, he's catching more fish because he's got a weight on the bottom of his. So, and she was exactly right. Now, I don't know if they knew what a drop shot was, but they just kept fishing the way they were, and they got a few. But they never did change the tactic to put a weight on the bottom. But the whole thing was, my presentation was more efficient because I had that drop shot weight out there. I could just pitch that bait out and let it go to the bottom much faster, shake it a little bit, hold it, and then I get the bite because the fish were on the bottom. Now that might be a different scenario if the bass were suspended up off the bottom, say maybe suspended down at 9, 10 feet or 8 feet in 15 feet of water. Well, now a drop shot would not be the best approach for that because you'd be fishing underneath the fish. And that rarely works. That rarely catches fish that way. They usually don't like to go down onto the bait to eat it. So a wacky rig Senko just with a slow fall into that depth range could be a better presentation for when the fish are suspended, which on that particular day they were not. The next tip that I can give you is when you catch a fish in deep water, get right back in there. So you catch your fish, you might want to, if it's a good one, take a picture, get it off the hook, but don't waste any time in getting your bait right back into where you caught that fish, because usually in deep water they'll be schooled up. And one of the ways you can tell this is if you watch as you're catching a fish, sometimes you'll see a bunch of other fish rise up with it or be swimming with it. Smallmouth bass especially do that, but largemouths do it at times too. And it's always worth, even if you don't think there's other fish out there, or if you thought you caught an isolated fish, it's always worth throwing the bait right back there as soon as possible, because what's happening is you've just got one to go. They get activated. If there is a school of fish there, they kind of get excited. They're not sure what's going on, but they're seeing that their buddies are eating. And the next thing you know, when you pitch that in there, you're getting bit right away again. So you want to get it right back in there and catch the next fish that way. The third tip that I can give you is when you are fishing deep water, you want to try and find what we call the spot on the spot. And what we mean by that is you might have a deep water structural element. Let's say it's a roadbed. And so this roadbed can go across an entire lake. And usually what this is on a reservoir, and you'll have a roadbed that's under the water. And just imagine when that reservoir wasn't there. So you have dry land, except in the middle you've got a stream going through, and that road is going over the stream with a bridge. So that bridge oftentimes, as long as it's not too deep or too shallow, will be the spot on the spot when it comes to roadbeds. So I like to look for that. I like to look for bridges on roadbeds, and if they're in the right zone of depth, they're oftentimes where you want to fish, because what will happen is sometimes they'll knock the bridge down before they fill up the lake, but the abutments will be there, the pillars are there, there's a bunch of concrete and cement around, And also right off that roadbed there's usually like a little berm, and it could be rocky there right where the bridge is. And so that's a spot on the spot. So once you know that, once you find that, you want to direct this is all about being efficient again, you want to direct your cast and your presentation to that area, to that bridge. That's what we mean by spot on the spot. It's another more efficient way of focusing in on where the fish are likely to be conjugated when you're on a deep water fishing excursion. Another good example is maybe you're fishing a point, a deep water point, and out in 22 feet you got a brush pile out there. Well, there's probably a pretty good chance that there's going to be fish around that brush pile, around that cover, because you got cover on the structure. The structure's the point, the cover's the brush pile. That's the spot on the spot in a lot of cases. And you can check this if you have a graph, if you have a good fish finder, you can go and you can look first and see if there's fish out there. I'm always looking for that too. I'm looking for bait first. If there's bait there, that tells me there's likely to be some game fish there that'll use that spot on the spot. They might not always be there, but they'll come up on it when they want to feed. And oftentimes, if you've got good electronics, you can see the bigger fish in there with the bait fish. When you see that, you definitely want to give that spot a try. Make sure you fish that area to see if you can't get one to go. That's all about spot on the spot. Now, the other thing is, how do you know to get your bait onto that spot every time? And this depends on the tools that you have. If you've got GPS on your fish finder, that'll help, because you can mark a waypoint and your fish finder will indicate for you where that spot is, how far it is from your finder, and it really helps quite a bit. But you don't have to have that. Let's say you don't have GPS, but you have a finder and you found a piece of cover, maybe a brush pile on a point. So once you find that, you might want to back off of it because you're going to cast to it and let your bait go down to it. And what you could do is you can start to triangulate. You can use points of reference. So a good example of that was I was on Nakamixon recently, and there's a point out there that I like to fish. It doesn't get fished a whole lot. There's a small piece of brush on the point. There's actually two pieces of brush. One is in something like 13 feet, and there's another brush pile in about 19 feet. And the way I line up on this, there's a path that comes right down at the end of the point. And I know that if I put my boat in 22 feet of water and direct it right at that path where I can see with my eyes, then I can throw out there and I'll be right in alignment to get onto that little brush pile and catch a fish that way. So you can use the shoreline points. Now let's say I might not even have my fish finder, right? Let's just say I forgot it, and I know that piece of brush is out there. Well, I'll pull away from there, but if when I did have that fish finder the last time out, and I looked at that, and I took a look at the bike path or the path going down to the end of the point, maybe I can triangulate that with two other points to the left and to the right, to the east and west, for example. Maybe there's a tower over here that I could line my boat up with, and if I line it up with that tower and that point where that path is and the church steeple over on the right hand side, then I could put my boat in a pretty good position to get back in there. Because what you want to be able to do is get repeated casts on the spot. Practice that. That does take practice in deep water, but you'll get better and better at it as you do it, and you'll catch more and more fish as a result. Tip number 4, size matters. So what we mean by that is sometimes when the fish are active and they're actually eating, sometimes I don't think size matters all that much, and so a medium-sized bait will work. And a good example of that recently was that same point that I was just talking about at Nakamixon. I was throwing a football head, and I just had a young woolly hogtail on the football head. This is something that I've thrown before. I have a lot of confidence in it, and I have some good success with it. So I threw this football head out there, and in a couple of casts, I caught a bass. It wasn't really big, but I caught a fish. And I thought that based on my past experience, that I was going to light them up on the football head in other spots that I fished. But as the day went on, I couldn't get bit on the football head. They just didn't want it anywhere else I fished, and it was a bit frustrating. That's when I started thinking about size. So the next thing I did was I downsized. I went down to this little Ned rig. And I did get bit on it. I was fishing a few points, but they were short hitting it. They were like short striking it, and I couldn't really get fish hooked on it. And then I thought, well, if that doesn't work, maybe I should upsize. So I threw on this. This is just a Matt Allen swim jig, 3/4 ounce, and a Kitech 4.8 swing impact fat on the back. Pretty big profile. I started throwing this out in deep water and just slow rolling it out in deep water. I caught 2 fish. Well, I caught a fish, and then I caught another one, a bigger one, about 4.5 pounds, that jumped off. You can take a look at that right here. Okay, tip number 5, speed matters. And there's two types of speed. There's horizontal speed and there's vertical speed. So horizontal speed I generally think of when I'm throwing a bait like this, a swim jig, but even more so when I'm throwing a crankbait, a deep diving crankbait. In the summer, I really like a Norman DD22. It's got a lot of good action for that hot water, that warm water. And there's a number of different retrieves that I use, but the one that works the most often for me on the pressured lakes that I fish, like Nakamixon, is to chuck that thing out there as far as I could throw it, and then just go to town, just reeling it really fast and very erratically. So I'm going really fast with that reel handle, stopping, going, stopping, and going, even before it gets to the bottom. And sometimes if those fish are suspended and you have that bait stop, go, and lift up a little, they'll slam it. That's if they're suspended. If they're on the bottom, then you just keep that thing going right down to the bottom and you just fish it erratically and as fast as you can along the bottom. That's usually my first approach, and it catches the majority of fish for me because I think it's a reaction strike, and those fish are probably not used to seeing a crazy retrieve like that. I mean, this will wear you out doing this kind of retrieve. I'm really going to town with it, but it does work. The other thing you can do is just a steady retrieve. That'll actually get the bait down quicker to the bottom, and then just use a slow, steady retrieve and bumping bottom, and every now and then stop and let that crankbait rise up a little bit and then go forward again. That works also. And then lastly, there's a retrieve that I found works too, and that is once I get the bait bumping bottom, I'll go slow at first, and then I'll begin to just gradually speed up, gradually reel faster and faster, almost like that the crankbait is a bait fish and it senses something behind it and it's trying to get away. Sometimes that'll work too. So it's good to try all those different techniques, but speed does matter, and you have to find out. Some days they might want a slow horizontal speed, other days they might want something fast. Usually in the water temperature when it's warm like this, fast is better. And when you have cold water, you might want to, what we call slow roll bait like this. Throw it out and just go real slow, just keeping it on the bottom, bumping bottom real slow. Oftentimes that works better in cold water. Now there's also vertical speed too, and that's the drop, right? So when you're throwing a bait out there, I like to think of a jig when I'm doing this. Throw a jig out there, even like this football head. Sometimes as soon as that bait comes down and hits the bottom, there'll be a fish on it, or before it even gets on the bottom, there'll be a fish on it. Or if you're fishing, say, a deep weed bed, a deep weed edge, maybe 15 to 18 feet, and you're pitching to those deep weeds, the edge of the weeds, you'll find that speed matters there too. So oftentimes I'll start with a general weight, 3/8 ounce, half ounce, something like that. But if nothing's happening, I'll quickly go to a very heavy weight, 3/4 ounce, ounce and a half, to get that reaction strike. And sometimes that is dynamite. It's like someone's flipping a switch. You go to that, from that lighter bait to that heavier bait, and boom, fish after fish all of a sudden. And sometimes they don't want that really fast fall. You just have to kind of experiment. Again, that usually does work better when the water's warm, because the fish are a little more active. Their metabolism is really going strong, and so you're more likely to get them to go after that presentation, in the months, I'll say, from June through September, even into October a little bit. But you have to experiment because each day is a little different, and you have to let the fish tell you what they want. So there's the 5 tips. Let's talk a little bit about deep water, how long you should stay, and how how long should you fish a deep water spot before you decide to leave and go to the next deep water spot. So boy, this is a tough one because there's a lot of different points of view on this, and some of it may depend on what you're doing, like whether you're fishing a tournament, whether you know fish are on the spot or not. So in the past, I've been more likely, if I felt there were fish on a spot, to kind of stay on it, to spend a good amount of time on it, sometimes hours, and just kind of keep grinding it out there until I can get a fish to react to what I'm throwing. I'll throw 3 or 4 different baits and I'll just try and get them to go. But as I've gotten more experienced with my fishing, and as I've been fishing deeper more and more often, I'm finding that there's value in going to a deep water spot and fishing that spot maybe 20 casts, 25 casts before you, and then go to the next spot if you can't get anything. If you can't get them on a couple different presentations, move right to the next spot. And what you'll find, and this is especially true in reservoirs and it's especially true in summer, is that each spot that you fish, the fish will get active at different times. There's a point that I like on Nakamix, and this time of year, its active time is somewhere between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And once you find out when that is, let's say it's 11:30, you catch a fish or 2. Well, you can pretty much set your clock by that the next couple of days, unless the weather changes drastically. 11:30, be at that spot again, and likely there will be active fish there. So once you find those kind of things, you kind of want to note them down because they could help you the next time you're on the water, especially in summertime. Now, over time, things change, of course, but during summer, the dog days of summer, and from June right through September, if you catch a fish on a spot at a certain time, you want to be there at that same time the next day. And you might find that you can catch them there all the time. But more often than not, you'll find that at that one time, that's when they become active and become a whole lot easier to catch versus trying to catch them throughout the day. So because of that, that is one of the reasons why it might be a good idea to jump from spot to spot to spot. Throw 20 to 30 casts out there, try some different baits. If it doesn't work, you just go to your next deep water spot. And you can just keep doing that through a bunch of spots. If you have a bunch picked out before you go, you just hit them. That might be 20 to 40 spots. Or maybe 4 or 5 really good solid spots. Well, through that, you just rotate through those. You just go back 1, 2, 3, 4 and go right back to 1 again. You just rotate through them for the period of time that you're fishing. This is an approach that a lot of tournament anglers use, especially when they're confident that the spots that they're fishing have the right size fish, right? Because some tournaments, it's the 5 biggest, heaviest fish that you catch. And so those, you need to catch big fish in order to compete and win. And so if you have a couple of spots that have those larger fish, you may want to just rotate through those spots over and over again rather than trying to fish all over the place where there may be some good fish, but maybe there's a lot of smaller fish. So it just depends what you want to do. And so there's some food to think about before you go fishing on your next deep water excursion. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit notifications. That's that bell. That'll tell you when the next video comes out. And as always, we're certified Bassified. We're all about the art and science of bass fishing. Can't wait to get back on the water. I hope to see you out there, and may God bless your fishing endeavors.